fine for everyone?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Good evening and good morning, gentlemen. I see it's happy hour for Sanjiv, as usual, this time today. And
My last one was here, and then we're done.
yes. Anyways, so we still have people joining us, and thank you for kind of connecting from all parts of the world today. I have, I'm expecting 100, but there may be more people, and this is also going out on YouTube, so I might keep hopping in, hopping out, but you know, we will all have a good time today. So, gentlemen, how's it going for you? How's the lockdown treating you all?
Last bottle of beer.
And that beer also was related to a airline brand, so you're lucky to have beer, Sanjeev, because we haven't had a sip in like 1.5 months at this point in time, at least.
Yeah.
I've been begging, borrowing, and stealing from whoever can give, you know, in the building complex. So
You must all come to Australia. Liquor is a part of essential services over here. So
well, same here. I wouldn't complain.
So that's in Australia.
We have liquor on the
that's in Australia.
even
I think Solo would have had
even in Toronto,
yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Even here, liquor is an essential item, and
yep.
though one day in a week they take their offs, but they're largely open, you know, throughout the week.
And here we are YouTubing, both of us, how to brew our own beer.
No, I'm not. But
have you guys figured it out yet?
No, but I did come across a very interesting way of brewing beer out of pineapple. So I'm going hunting for pineapples tomorrow.
Oh, good.
Nice.
Sounds good.
Maybe the lockdown is long enough for you to grow some. Anyways,
Put some quick intros, Ajay.
Yes, gentlemen, all yours.
So why don't we start with Sudip, Solo, Sandeep, and then myself.
Yep.
Okay, I'm Colonel Sudip Mukerjee, 21 years in the army, then SpiceJet for a little less than 2 years. And thereafter, I'm working on my own. I'm a behavioral change trainer and a coach. And I work with people. During this lockdown, I'm conducting a lot of trainings online. So I have been busy. As also, my wife makes me do a lot of work which the Bai has left, you know, undone. And, so that's how things are.
So, Colonel, I've been curious. We did not know each other for a few days until a few days back. How did you were in the army? How did Sanjeev pull you into the airline business, or how did you kind of find your way to airlines?
So at the end of 20 years, I decided that I would leave the army. And when I was in the phase of looking for a job or looking for what to do, I met Sanjeev, and he said that this is an airline I'm working with and things are not very bright. However, I'm sure that we can change things and pull it around, turn it around, and are you in? So yeah, sure, I'm in. What do you want me to do? So initially he said, with your army background and your knowledge of processes and of people, how can you help me? And so we sat down and discussed, and basically he needed a hands-on report on what was going on and then probably that's where I fit in. So I would be traveling a lot, maybe 3 or 4 flights a week to various places, and I think I'm perhaps one of the few people who visited nearly 100% of all the stations that SpiceJet were operating from.
All right. And how did you like the aviation life? I mean, apart from the everything that was going on the ground, how did you like it?
Very, very different. But then again, I say people are people and work is work. So it's
All right.
Sudip was essentially, kind of my, one of the roles he played, very important roles, was he was my eyes and ears on the ground. traveling the network and just seeing, how things are going, how people's morals are, and just the reality on the ground, and was very important, I think. And as he said, he used to fly at least 4 or 5 flights a week, and I used to tell him, like I told all HODs when I first joined. I said in every weekly meeting, I want every HOD to tell me when was their last flight, and you have to write a flight report and an airport report. And apparently it was a change, because earlier, part of cost conservation was you don't travel. So I said, if you don't travel around your own network on your own aircraft and visit your own staff, who's going to do it for you, right? So I think that's a penny wise and pound foolish cost saving, where in an airline people are told not to travel, then basically there's no supervision or hands-on reality check happening whatsoever. So Sudip helped play a big role in that. And then we had done an upward feedback survey in the early days of SpiceJet, and where people scored very negative. Upward feedback NPS score is like people who view you positively. From that, you minus the people who don't view you positively. If equal number of people view you positively and not positively, your score is 0. 0 is fine. We said 0 is okay. You can't please everybody. But if your score is negative 75, which means that, for every one person who likes you, 4 people don't like you, then that's a worry. And so when we got the upward feedback scores, luckily there weren't too many who were very negative.
Mm-hmm.
But those who were, Shudip's job was to go and speak to the people they work with, speak to them, try to figure out what's going on, and see whether there was some possibility of fixing things, right? And so it was a lot of different roles that he did while he was there. Anyhow, I've just jumped in solo. Everyone knows, I think, but yeah.
Yeah, so I've worn a lot of hats over the last 18, 19 years in marketing and advertising. But the large part of my career, the last few years have been spent primarily in aviation. So from 2009 till about 2015, I was with SpiceJet. And in between, I did a small stint with a telecom firm for 2 years. And then in 2017, got back to aviation, worked with Vistara till about April of 2019. And since then have been pretty much on my own, relocated to Toronto, trying to do a few interesting things here. Some of them are in the pipeline, some of them are out in the open. So yeah, it's been exciting so far, and definitely do miss the action of an everyday aviation job.
So Solo, how did you? I mean, you saw this. You saw SpiceJet from long before
Yes.
Sanjiv went in. So and the rest of the team came in. All the gentlemen we have here today. So what was your feel about the airline? Before it started to kind of sort of go on the downward trend.
I think there are two things which are very important, and I saw that over my 6 years at SpiceJet. Two things. One was leadership and culture. And initially when I got in, there was Mr. Sanjay Agarwal, who was leading the airline at that point in time, and then he moved on to Kingfisher. During that time, there was a lot of emphasis on communication, building the culture, building the airline, investing in people, etc. But over the years, somehow, that focus got lost somewhere. And because of various pressures which the airline went through when there was, and it's a tough market, and the airline somehow, lost a bit of it. In 2013, when uh, uh, Sanjeev actually, 2014, when actually Sanjeev came in, he initially came in as a consultant, and he spent some time with us. He told us that he might be coming on board as a consultant trying to help the airline. And the first thing that I think we tried to do was nail down key issues that were plaguing the airline, which was very, very important, because someone had to do a reality check. And I think that exercise really helped us uh, figure out where we were and where we needed to be. And from there, when Sanjeev took over and took charge, he set the direction for us going forward.
Nice. Sandeep, let's come to you next.
Right. So Been in the hospitality business for about 24 years, hotels and airlines, primary airlines as such. I was with SpiceJet from 2012 to 2014, then went back to the hotels for a bit of a short stint, and then joined Vistara. At present, I am in Australia, and I head the in-flight services for a small regional carrier called Airnorth. Airnorth also is Australia's second oldest airline, actually, running for 42 years now. So, yeah, so that's where I am at this point of time.
And since when were you at SpiceJet? When did you?
This was April of 2012 onwards. So prior to Sanjiv actually came in, and then was there till close to the end of 2014. Yep.
And what did you see as the mood of the airline? When you were there.
I think, and Sanjeev will elaborate more on this, and as we go along, we'll talk about how we changed this part of it. But I think one of the most prevalent things that I first saw when I walked in over there was the whole "Chalta hai" attitude, which was extremely prevalent at all quarters, everywhere. I mean, wherever you look, it was all right. I mean, my first few days over there, my first few weeks, and in fact, a month, I did a lot of incognito flights just to gauge what's going on, what's not going on board as far as services are concerned, what we need to improve, what we need to change and stuff. And believe you me, what I saw kind of shocked me a little bit, because it was okay. It was just okay to do anything and everything, and that needed to change. That was what was eating the airline alive. They had some fantastic people all around, crew, pilots, staff, but I felt in the initial days that they lacked motivation, self-belief, and certain guidance and direction. I think, which eventually we did get when Sanjiv did come in, because when I think we were there, Solo, you remember this part. There was Neil who was moving out, I think, and then there was a period in between. There was not.
Yeah.
We
Well,
had
there was
nobody.
no CEO. There was no CEO. Yeah.
Correct, and Mr. Natarajan took over for a wee bit, and he comes from a non-aviation background, and that's when Sanjiv first came in, and as a consultant, spent a lot of time with us. I remember having almost a 45-minute chat, and he was jotting down notes after notes after note, and he was just kind of filling up pages on that, and I was like, oh my god, I don't know whether he's going to come in as the next CEO, or is he going to remain a consultant, and what's next, what's in store for us. But I think it worked out very well, didn't it?
Yeah, well, let's ask Sanjiv.
So guys, let me just set the context for this discussion. I mean, the topic today is change management and culture change, and the period in which we've all together SpiceJet, basically is 2014, before ownership change, is what is going to be the kind of the backdrop to this conversation. So to give you some context as to how I viewed SpiceJet after my not incognito, but my supposed consultant role interviews that I did with all department heads, I'd actually already been hired as the COO. There was no CEO, and I was a CEO designated at that point. But the agreement I had with SL, who was one of our board members from the Sun Group, wonderful guy, was that let's keep that quiet. Why don't you go in like a neutral third party and try to figure out what's really going on? So that's why I came and I said I'm here as a consultant. But it was very well known to me and to the owners that there was a bigger plan out there. But the context of what was going on, I like to use an analogy of an aircraft. I think it's appropriate. SpiceJet was like an aircraft which is running out of fuel being cash, which is descending because of all kinds of issues to do with, what I think my colleague spoke about, to do with culture issues, Chalta hai issues, lack of direction or whatever there was, lack of leadership for a while, and so on and so forth. So here's an aircraft which is running out of fuel, which is descending and has strong headwinds. And the headwinds was essentially the cost of fuel, which was about $120 a barrel. And I was told that see what you can do to try to get the airline out of its descent at least. ideally see whether it can climb. Try to make the fuel last as long as possible, even though we know that it's limited, and obviously at some point, if you don't put in new fuel, it's going to run out. And let's see whether we can find an investor to put money into the airline. And this is at a time when it was making heavy losses. 2013, I think, was its heaviest loss-making year. And so it was a pretty bad situation, from that point of view. And what's interesting, and I like to talk about this, is that, and I don't want to put you guys on the spot. Sudip wasn't there yet, but Solo and Sandeep were both there along with all the other HODs. But in my very first HOD meeting, which I had, after I got there, I said, look, run it your way. I just want to see how you guys do your HOD meetings. And so each HOD stood up and presented a few slides for 10 minutes each or whatever. And every HOD showed how they were exceeding KPIs and doing better than target, and how things were going great. And at the end of the dozen or 15 HODs who presented, and everybody's doing great and exceeding KPIs, and everything is gangbusters, I said, well, if everyone's rowing forward, why is the boat moving backward? And there was a kind of a silence in the room at that point. And so the reality that we were in had to hit home, because we said, look, we can't all pretend in our own little islands that we are doing fine and that there's no problem, because there is a problem, and we better acknowledge there's a problem. It's like the cartoon you see, there's a cartoon that goes around of the Titanic, where the front of the ship is pointing out of the water and the back is underwater. And the captain and somebody else is standing on the front of the ship and saying, look, we're going higher, we're not sinking. Who said we're sinking? So while not seeing what's going on behind. Anyhow, so the main point of departure was that we had to arrest the descent. We had to somehow improve performance, not just financial, but also operational and all the other key aspects of performance, so that a buyer would be interested, to even consider, investing in SpiceJet. Because, there's a saying which says, dress it up for sale. So we were kind of dressing it up, not for sale, but for investment. And I think rest of this call today, we can talk about what we did, but what we saw was, or what I felt, was that we had a set of very good leaders, each of which felt in the one-on-ones with me that they were fighting alone, and that they were fighting alone, and they were fighting without really knowing what direction they should be fighting towards, and what the end game is. And it was, it was a tough situation. But let's talk about what happened thereafter, because just to recap, about 5 or 6 months later, by May of 2014, which is about 6 months after I joined, and we started doing various things, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, ₹1 sale and all kinds of things. But by May of 2014, our load factors had gone into the 80s, it was earlier in the 60s. Our on-time performance had become number one. We were last earlier, and we became number one by January, to the point that my good friend Aditya called me up saying that, how can you guys be better than Indigo? You must be fudging your data. I still tease him about that. And we were not. And eventually Indigo, got some competition from us in terms of OTP, and they pulled up the socks, and they eventually beat us, and we became number 2 for the rest of the year, until our problem started around September, after which, of course, things were different. But the most important thing that, intrigued investors, and there were investors looking at us at that time, was the fact that year on year, if you look at the month of May over the month of May, the first quarter over first quarter, despite oil prices being $120 per barrel, which means it hadn't changed much in the year, we had cut our losses by half. But the problem is, those who can study the data and understand, say, okay, cutting your losses by half despite nothing changing externally is a good thing. That means you're heading in the right direction, but you're still making losses. If you've cut your losses by half, you're still running out of money. You're still not making money. And the challenge still remained that we had to somehow get investment and funding into the airline while oil prices were at that level. So anyhow, that's the context of this discussion, I think. And I remember that, and sorry if I'm taking a bit long initially, but then I'll give the others a chance. But, I remember my first flight with SpiceJet was before I joined them, and I wasn't impressed because I thought the crew uniform looked shabby. and grooming was poor, and the aircraft wasn't very clean, and the counters were dirty, and I just thought there was nobody really caring about the details. And the few weeks after joining, I had asked Sandeep to organize a base meeting where with the ground staff and the cabin crew who happened to be at the base. And so he organized it. And while I was waiting, I saw these smart, well-dressed people coming into the room in a smart uniform, wearing jackets. And I said, which airline crew are they? And they said, they're SpiceJet. I said, how come I've never seen them like this on the flights? Right. So the entire feeling, attitude had become that, oh, we don't need to wear our jackets. We don't really need to care about, but they dressed up very well and looked very good when they came for the first meeting with me. And so one of the first things we did is, okay, everyone has to wear the jackets on board, and we set up some grooming guidelines. And I remember there was some protest that in the heat of winter, you want us to wear jackets, etc. I said, no, you don't have to wear the jacket the entire time. But when you're welcoming passengers and seeing them off, you must have it on. And whenever you're in the airport terminal, you must have it on so that you look smart. So those are the kind of small things. But like I always say, small things make a big difference. But those are the small things that started signaling that the old Chalta Hai was not going to work anymore. And that we had a lot of capability and potential in the airline itself. We just had to use it. Anyway, I'll shut up now and let you guys.
Before you shut up, I have one question for you. And this is a reader question. Sorry, somebody asked, and I'm supposed to ask you on their behalf, what happened in that room? What made you take up the job? You know, because you knew they were down in the dumps, perhaps. And so what did the management or the owners tell you that made you kind of, you know, sign up for this challenge?
So first of all, SpiceJet had been around since 2005. So it was one of the oldest then prevailing LCCs. In fact, it had been around, started a year before Indigo. It was in 2013 close to Indigo in size. SpiceJet had 57 aircraft, if I'm not mistaken, and Indigo had 65. They were fairly close to each other. Indigo had 29% market share, we had 23%. And when I met the promoters, it was SL and the CEO of the Sun Group, Shami. They just seemed very nice guys who genuinely wanted to find a way to make SpiceJet somehow improve its performance and turn around. And so I said, okay, you know, it's a big airline. It's not that it's a fly-by-night operation. It's been around for a while. It's done well and made profits in the past. And it seems to have very committed promoters who genuinely convinced me that they would give me a free hand. And I have to admit, they gave me a very free hand. In fact, a lot of the things we did, I have to say, whether it's a ₹1 sale, the holy dance on board, whether it was even the weekend uniform or red chili, any of these visible things that we did, we sprung it as a surprise to the board. And I think most other boards would be shocked to hear this. But the SpiceJet board loved it. They were delighted. They said, that's what we want management to do. It's not for us to decide what livery you want to put or how you want to price. That's why we hire you guys. And they were seeing the results. They were seeing losses were coming down sharply year on year. So they said, look, long as the key metric that they're interested in, the financial performance improvement is working, we're going to stay out of your way. And that was fantastic. It's not very often you get that opportunity.
So, you know, gentlemen, what was it like, you know, in the initial days? Sanjiv's already given his narration, perhaps, you know, Solo or Sandeep can give us their version. Or Sudip was the man on the ground. Perhaps we'll go to you first.
I came in March of 2014, and initially, that's Sanjiv said that, you know, I want to know what's the actual position on ground, and I said that for that I need to travel. So he said, okay, go travel. Who's stopping you? So I went and actually met everybody. So I would go to a station, meet each and every person, talk to them for about a half an hour, 45 minutes, and understand what their problems were, what their, you know, what was stopping them from performing well, or why were we going down? And they would give a long list of problems that they faced and they had raised, and no one was listening to them. So what I started doing, you know, as with Sanjiv is, I would write down emails, you know, naming that this is the problem which the ground staff facing, this is the problem with the cabin crew are facing, this is the problem which the engineers are facing, this is the problem that the captains are facing, and those emails would be, you know, seen by Sanjiv and the head of the departments, and they would discuss. And so basically it brought to fore whatever problems there were on ground.
And what were these problems, Sudip?
Sorry?
What were some of these problems?
Some of these problems were essentially the hierarchy was very, very rigid. So you could not speak to your boss's boss. So it would all flow a channel, which would mean that only filtered information would come up to Sanjiv. And that changed. And one thing which Sanjiv did thereafter was give email IDs to everybody. So every person now had an email ID which ended with spicejet.com, and they could write emails to anybody. And that perhaps was one of the most empowering things that each person had. So we made people from just another ground staff or just another cabin crew to what their names were, and we gave them an identity. And I think as leaders in adversity, one thing that you need to understand is that you can't do it alone. You have to get everybody on board. And that's what we did. We got everybody on board. There was a sense of ownership which came in. I think Sandeep would be, would say it better, that each cabin crew thereafter would, do their stuff. Each ground staff would do their stuff. And Solo being in the head office, he was looking after the marketing. People would reach out to him as well. I mean, everybody started talking to everybody else. And it was no longer stovepiped verticals, but everyone came together. And that's perhaps was the single most reason why we turned it around. That it was a concerted effort from each and every person to do well, to bring the company up from where it was.
I think just to add to what Sudeep said, there was no rallying ground, for everyone to come together. What was really happening was, like Sanjeev gave the example of the Titanic, half of it out of the water and half of it outside. The right example, as for me, would, another example would be is, the big elephant in the room with everyone having their eyes covered. Everyone was, doing their own thing. And when we started off in 2014, we started off, and there was this philosophy which was put in place, which defined the pillars which were important for the airline going forward around Soch. We used to call it Soch, but it meant safety, on time, cleanliness, courtesy, and hygiene. And everyone across the board, across the organization, was supposed to lend in and add value in their own way through their own endeavors and through their own initiatives into this. And this kind of gave everyone something to work towards, and unified the efforts of individuals, individual departments, and everyone else, so whether it was marketing, whether it was ground services, whether it was the in-flight services, or anyone else. So everyone had something which brought them together.
So another thing which Sanjeev used to do is to write emails to everybody. Once everybody had email IDs, he would send out these emails which would go to all employees of the company. And that would mean that, you're hearing directly from the horse's mouth. You're not getting a filtered version of what, what Sanjeev wanted in the company. So that also gave people, brought everybody on the same page. One more thing was happening is there was a lot of revenue leakage which was happening. Because of people knowing that somebody listened to them, they came up and reported that.
What kind of revenue leakage?
So Sanjeev, can you just talk about it?
No, basically, all kinds of waivers and favors being done, and fare rules not being followed, fares being adjusted at the last minute to below what the authorized fare levels were. Unfortunately, there were some bad apples who were indulging in bad practices, and a lot of revenue leakage happens. Some more obvious forms are excess baggage being collected and no receipt being given. So over time, because no one was really monitoring on the ground what was happening, this is what happens. People develop bad habits, and so we had to. One thing I want to say though, anytime you want to change culture and change behavior, etc., and you go and start listening to what's happening on the ground, you will make some enemies. And I want to be very clear on that. Yeah. So, and this is true. I mean, the safest way to be popular is to not do anything. then everyone loves you because they can continue either being incompetent or dishonest or reporting to work at 10:30 in the morning and going home at 5 and playing video games half the day. But long as you leave them alone, they love you. You're the best guy. But if you start being strict, what happens is there are two reactions that happen. The good staff really enjoy it. They really appreciate it. They really feel motivated. They really start producing, and that's what pulls the company ahead. But what happens, and it's a danger that all of us, especially now with social media and with email and everything else we have to face, there are those who feel threatened. There are those who feel that their good old easy lives or even livelihoods or other sources of income or just whatever it is, power bases are being eroded, and they start trying to sabotage you. And this will happen to everybody who tries to make change. And so we started receiving anonymous letters, accusing HODs or station managers or whatever of doing this and that. And we had a simple concept. We said, look, we have our whistleblower channel and we have our means to report things. But if an anonymous letter comes accusing people of all kinds of things, only one thing happens to the letter. It gets thrown in the trash, right? And because we started throwing letters in the trash, and we started taking action against bad apples through legitimate means, through actually, going and investigating what's going on, not depending on letters, the anonymous letters stopped, and people started realizing that that wasn't going to work anymore. But again, one leadership lesson is, and I think it's a common lesson that a lot of people say over time, is that if you've not offended anybody in your life, you've not been a leader. Uh, and leaders do offend people, but normally the people you offend are the types who were not contributing anyway in the right direction, and so be it, right? And in fact, I think a lot of people were over the next few months either allowed to leave or asked to leave because we found solid reasons that they should no longer continue. So anyhow, that's a different point. But the point that Sudip made about email addresses is important. At SpiceJet at that time, only management staff between people at head office and the station managers, etc., had email IDs. The ground staff and the cabin crew did not have email IDs. I'm not sure if the pilots did or not. I don't remember now. But the reason I was offered for them not having email IDs was data security. That you don't know, who may forward what to them, and who they may then give it to, outsiders. I said, well, if you don't trust your own staff, and they're anyway an absentee workforce because you're not on the aircraft or the airport watching what they're doing. If you don't trust your own staff, then how do you expect them to respect you and to do the jobs right? So when we said everybody gets an email ID, it was actually seems such a small thing, but it created a huge sort of reaction that, wow, we are finally being recognized as being true employees of SpiceJet. So that's interesting. Anyhow.
So I want to dig a little bit more into culture. And Sanjiv, I know that you are very about empowering the frontline staff because they are the ones who represent the brand and the face of the company. Now, in the current times, in the current times of crisis where airlines are unable to pay their staff, what are some of the things that they can do to keep their employees engaged and motivated? And I think I want to hear two perspectives here. So it'd be great to hear a CEO perspective from you, Sanjeev. But I'd also like to pull in Sandeep into this because he's been there, he's been working with crew and his own experience of, working with the staff on the ground.
So let me just give you a 2-minute personal view. See, the situation you're facing today, where many airlines are finding it difficult to pay their staff versus what we were facing in 2014 is very different. In 2014, we had the ability still, even in the worst of times, to say pay your staff, because the worst of times was we could see the light at the end of the tunnel. We knew that there were investment discussions going on. We knew that this situation would be over in a finite amount of time, and therefore we did not have to take the kind of measures that airlines now have to take, because now in the current crisis, it's unprecedented. There is no operations happening, which means no revenue coming in, and it's indefinitely stopped. And airlines have been told to just stop taking bookings indefinitely into the future, which basically means for an airline, which is a very high cost, fixed cost business, and which depends on a very perishable commodity, which is the airline seat. Every day, every seat that goes empty is a revenue loss forever. For an airline anywhere in the world, this is like a death sentence. You're not being allowed to operate. You're not being allowed to take bookings. and yeah, and you don't have an end date for it. So because you don't have an end date, because you don't know where the light at the end of the tunnel is, I think airlines now are being forced to take much tougher steps, unfortunately impacting staff as well, than what we had to take back then. But there's a reason for it. Now, some airlines have, for good reason, they ran very tight ships, and they had the ability, they have much larger cash balances than some other airlines do. So the airlines with large cash balances can afford to pay the staff maybe another month or two. But eventually, every airline in the world, even the most profitable airlines, whether it's Delta Airlines or Southwest or Ryanair or Lufthansa Group, everybody is now saying that we have to put an end to that now because we're going to run out of cash, because we don't know when the situation is going to go away. So short-term pain for the longer-term gain. Short-term pain is salaries are being impacted, but the long-term gain is we're trying to preserve the company, keep the company alive so that your job remains alive 1 or 2 months down the road when things hopefully start normalizing. Versus the other option, which is we pay you now, hoping that we resume operations in a month's time, but we are grounded for another 2 months and be out of cash, and we don't even have cash to restart the airline. So it is a very complicated situation right now. But I don't want to talk too much about it. It's not that's not the topic for today. But I just want to highlight why it's different from what it was back then. Under normal circumstances, paying your staff is the most important thing. But when it's a question of survival of the airline itself and of the jobs, then sometimes some very difficult decisions need to be made. Sandeep.
Sandeep, you have something?
Yeah, well, correctly said, Sanjiv. I think two separate issues and two separate bits. 2013-14 was a different era altogether. Today is, of course, completely different. All over, unprecedented. It's not business as normal, as Sanjiv puts it more often than not on Twitter, saying it's not business as usual. It's just completely different. Well, back in the day in 2014, I think one of the biggest things that we did was we started listening to people a lot more. You've got to let people know that you're listening to them. I think that's one of the biggest messages that we kind of brought across to them. It's like Colonel also mentioned, when you're walking across, when you're just talking to someone, if they feel shut down, or if they feel not addressed, if they feel that that you're hearing them and you're not listening to them, then there is a problem. Then there is a huge communication gap that you're building up automatically in your system, and which is the worst thing that you can do. You've got to be able to address the problem and not the person. That's another huge lesson that we learned during that point of time. There were problems galore. But was it a person-specific thing? The answer is no. It was a system-specific thing. So you've got to address the problem in itself and not the person, because that person may just be misguided or directionless or not have been told that whether it's the right thing or wrong thing. They wouldn't know any better, perhaps. So it's your job as a colleague, as a senior colleague, to be able to guide them in the right direction and in the right manner to saying, look, this is the right thing to do, this is the wrong thing to do, but not as a punitive measure, but as a guiding force towards making them do the right thing, making them realize. And this also ties up with the empowerment. So when you empower a person to do the right thing, they will end up doing the right thing. But when you end up bullying them literally or telling them, look, this is what you've got to do, then there is a sense of pushback saying, look, I know better. I'm facing, the harsh realities every single day and you're not. So you can sit in your AC office and feel you can tell me whatever you want to tell me, but I'm the one who's facing angry guys out there for whatever reasons. That was then. You've also got to be a lot more visible and nimble and not be stuck about, because it's been like this for 20 years in the airline business, it has to remain that way. Like I remember one of the first things that I did, and I was in process of transitioning it, and Sanjiv came and he encouraged me on the entire thing, was the whole grooming bit, which was a huge bit. We actually were the first airline to allow crew to color their hair golden and highlight red and allow them to wear spectacles and different watches, because prior to that, it was just, you have to wear a 2mm by 2.5mm black dial, white dial, golden not allowed, this not allowed. So we eased it all. We started treating people, or they felt like they've been treated like human beings. And I think that was where the connect really started happening with a lot of folks over there. They also saw a lot of visibility. there were certain travel restrictions earlier, and then Sanjiv walked in and said, "Why aren't you guys traveling? And why am I not getting a report?" And if you're not there with your staff, if you're not there with your frontline troops, then how do you know what the problems are? Because it's only hearsay. You're not seeing it yourself. You're not hearing it. You're not listening to them directly. So that was that. In today's situation, of course, things are completely different. Again, the most important thing back then, even now, is communication. To be uh, honest, and to be transparent. And I think these are the two most important things when you're actually communicating with your colleagues and your team members and your staff. Uh, whether you're giving good news or whether you're giving bad news. I mean, I know very recently I've had situations where I have to unfortunately stand down some of my crew because of the whole COVID incident. But it's not meant saying, oh, let me just send a text message to you and say that, oh, you've been stood down, or, send you an email saying that you've been stood down. You have to make the effort to actually call the person and sit down with them, explain the situation to them, get on a face-to-face with them. I think that's where they also realize that, you're standing along with them and they're not facing the situation alone. And all of us are in this together, kind of a thing. So visibility, being together with them, standing with them, protecting them, and assuring them with honest and clear, transparent communication. That's where you win the game, to be honest with you.
Just to add to what Sandeep said, one more thing that was required at that time, or would be required at any such time, is to relook at your brand and try to see, is your brand relevant on the situation that you're operating in? Is it relevant to all stakeholders, internal and external? And what we did was we did a deep dive and we looked back at, what is it that we were working towards? We looked at the philosophy of Soch, which was our overarching principle at that time. And we took out two things, courtesy and human decency, out of it. And we coined this brand sign off called With All Our Heart, which became like a wall cry, which was about people internally, people externally, which kind of, brought all people together. We made the frontliners the face of the airline. For the first time, they really felt, empowered. They were as part of all our communication. They were being put up on magazine covers. They were being put up on billboards. And there was a race for, these guys to really compete, put out their best, because they knew they would get an opportunity to be out there. The second thing was, we looked at, what was important, and we looked at, how we could make the airline more customer centric, whether by means of products that we were putting out, uh, the new meals or the new meals menu that we had put out at that point in time, looking at technology, how best we could use technology, whether being more responsive to our own channels like website, etc., or looking at new media at that point in time, like Twitter, Facebook, and engaging more with customers, and eventually, creating a more empowering airline for not only people within the organization but externally.
So, gentlemen, I think a lot of the focus is on, in crisis management, is on communication, as I get it from all of you. But what was the most, what was the time where you really kind of felt you were not being able to, is a situation where you really found very hard to come back from? I think we'll start from Sanjeev, because, uh, Sanjeev would perhaps have a top-down perspective.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, Ajay. There were, like I said, we were making a lot of progress on many of the key metrics, whether it's profitability or operational metrics or customer metrics. But there were three occasions in which, during the year 2014, when we were close to getting investment and from private equity funds, and deals, term sheets were being written. Um, on three occasions when we were getting close, we were basically hit across our knees and brought to our knees. Right. The first occasion was around June of 2014, when we had signed a term sheet with potential investors to put in a good amount of money to the airline. And these were foreign private equity funds. And then, unfortunately, Mr. Maran, the promoter, the ED put out a charge sheet against him for certain accusations relating to a different company, SL, not relating to SpiceJet. Eventually, a year or two later, all those charges were dropped. But what happened after that ED notice came out is that these PE firms just pulled out of the talk, saying that our corporate governance doesn't allow us to uh, do a deal or transaction, or have as a partner somebody who's got something like an ED enforcement notice against them. So that was the first time we got hit across our knees, and and then I had to go back to my department head meetings, etc., saying, guys, that we were very close to getting investment, but that's on hold now. But to Mr. Maran's credit, what these investors had said at that time was, if Mr. Maran agrees to exit the company, they will be happy to do the deal with another promoter, but the condition was it had to be a blue chip corporate entity. And Mr. Maran, to his credit, said that I'll exit. I don't want to be the barrier or the hurdle to SpiceJet getting investment, etc. Because he had already put in about 1,500 crores and lost it, so he didn't want to put in more money at that point, because he just thought that, well, his first preference was to bring in a investment partner, but when that ED notice came out, he said, okay, if I'm now the hurdle, I'll step aside, but let somebody else come in. So we were working towards and getting very close to a alternate promoter, an Indian blue chip house whose name obviously I cannot mention, working with the same foreign private equity funds to do a deal when the DGCA put a stop sale notice that we could not take bookings beyond 30 days. And that created a bank run, because that basically told the public and the travel agents, etc., that the DGCA had lost confidence in SpiceJet's ability to continue. And this is when we were still operating fine, more or less. Out of a fleet of 57, we had returned 5 aircraft to 6 aircraft. But for whatever reason, maybe competitive pressure, etc., the DGCA was made to believe that, SpiceJet has started canceling flights. Even though, like I said, only 5 or 6 aircraft we had returned. So we had canceled some amount of flights, but wasn't a huge amount at all. But so the medicine they gave almost killed the patient, because it created a bank run on SpiceJet. When you say that you cannot take bookings more than 30 days, and about half our bookings used to come, or maybe even 60% beyond 30 days. 60% of our bookings or our revenues actually used to come beyond 30 days. What happened is everybody stopped booking, even within 30 days, and our revenues, our cash flow dropped by 90% almost overnight. So whatever cash we were bringing in and working on uh, this situation on the funding disappeared. And obviously that spooked the potential investor, the Indian blue chip corporate entity. And they started having cold feet, saying, oh my God, what's happening, right? But anyhow, we persevered. We had to return some aircraft, this, that, and the other. But we managed, this private equity investors managed to find a third blue chip entity willing to, partner and buy out Mr. Maran's stake. And this was around November, December 2014. And while those discussions were in final stages, suddenly one fine day the fueler stopped fueling us for about a day. And when that happened at Kingfisher 2 years earlier, in October 2012, when the fueler stopped fueling, and staff at Kingfisher and even at SpiceJet, the ground staff, many of them got physically assaulted, abused. Some of them had their shirts torn off their backs, etc., because suddenly one day flights were all cancelled for that day. What happened at Kingfisher is the staff never came back the next day, because by then they hadn't been paid for 10 months, and they had just sort of decided that, okay, this was it. There was no coming back. But at SpiceJet, everybody came back to work the next day, because the longest we had delayed salaries was maybe 2 weeks or so. But they had all been paid, so they never lost the faith. And so they came back to work the next day. That helped SpiceJet survive. But by that time, I think Mr. Maran had really completely lost his confidence in being able to, find a buyer for the airline, because every time something seemed to go wrong. And then eventually, the fourth opportunity was the current promoter, and the deal was done with him. But the sad thing is that every time the airline looked like it was about to get on its, or regain altitude, it was given a blow. And it's a very, very sad story, because so many people had worked so hard. But I'm very happy to say that after finally Ajay, came on board, a lot of things worked together. I think Ajay's ability to to make things happen in terms of wet leases, bringing in aircraft, etc. To make up for the aircraft that had left the fleet. Fuel prices had collapsed by that time, etc. So the transformation thereafter did not take too much time. But it was quite heartbreaking what had happened though during 2014. So that's a story that I think very few people know about, and obviously one cannot go into too many details and mention names. But it was a fairly heartbreaking story during that year.
Just to make people a little happier, in 2014 September there were floods in Kashmir, and SpiceJet, despite being what we were going through, we flew, I think, free of cost, people from Srinagar to Delhi, and that, I think everybody rallied together to make that happen. The ground staff, the cabin crew, the engineers, the pilots, everyone played their part, and we did that operation like a military operation, and I think showed people that we do whatever we do with all our heart. That changed a lot of things.
Absolutely, Sudip. In fact, I just want to mention that during those floods, many airlines, including the national airline, had to cancel services to Srinagar. And we actually added services. And we didn't add services to make money, as everybody likes to accuse us airlines of doing. We added services to evacuate people from Srinagar. And I gave the story in one of my video episodes recently. Sudip was there for several days in Srinagar. It was a mad scene at the airport. Hundreds of people there, those who had missed their flights because they couldn't make it to the airport because of the floods, or whose flights had been cancelled, etc. But they all had tickets. And that's the reason they were allowed into the terminal. And I was there on one counter watching over what's going on. And literally there were people, it's like scenes from a movie, hordes of people with their hands out saying, please, take us, we need to leave. We've been here for days, whatever it is, And these were not rich people. These were workers, etc. And Giorgio, who was then the CEO of Go Air, was at the next counter, and I saw he was sweating. So I asked somebody, why is he sweating? And they said that he was out in the ramp helping load bags, which really created a very, very positive impression on me. So I spoke to Giorgio and said, look, what should we do? Because majority of the people here don't have bookings on SpiceJet or Go Air. They're actually those who had bookings on other airlines who've canceled their flights, or they may have had bookings on SpiceJet or Go Air, but that was for 3 days ago, and it's not for today. So we made a decision on the spot. Giorgio and I spoke about it. I said, look, if anybody's got a ticket, doesn't matter which airline, which date, if you've got a seat on the plane, take the guy. And so we took people on board, and we never charged them. We never even asked the other airline for the money back because it was just too complicated. We just said, okay, we've got 20 seats left on this flight because a lot of no-shows also were happening. People who could not make it for this flight would show up 2 days later. So with next 20 people in line, doesn't matter. You have a ticket, okay, Indigo ticket or Air India ticket, whatever ticket. All right, you get on. And that's the way we handled it. And I remember the respect again for Giorgio that day, because after all is said and done, I haven't actually been out and helped load bags myself. Sudip might have done that, but Giorgio was doing that himself, and he was the CEO of Go Air at that time.
Yeah. And we we were traveling on those flights as well, and there were people who we gave food on the flight, and they had not had meals for the last 3 or 4 days, and that's what happened.
Sudip, what I want to say, Ajay, is that all this we did not because the government asked us to, not because we wanted to make money, and we never, like I said, even took the ticket fare. And it hurts me when I hear people now, including on social media, say things like, oh, private airlines, so what if there's a pandemic? Let them go out of business. They should have planned better. What have they done for the country? I can't believe that. I mean, first of all, even if you're loss making, you pay a lot of taxes to the country because everything is taxed in the aviation industry. Fuel and parts and customs duties and all kinds of fees and charges and excise. And we are one of the highest taxpayers. The only thing that a loss making airline may not be paying is income tax. But that is only one small component of the taxes. But to be told that, what have you airlines done? Why should you take taxpayer funds? We fly these RDG routes, the national integration routes, which are all loss making. The government doesn't subsidize us for that. We are made to fly them, right? And we take losses. But when we need help, and the government is looking into our requests, that's a different topic. But when aviation experts come on TV and social media and everywhere saying that let them go to hell, they're not taxpayer, they are private. Why should the taxpayer support them? I just can't believe it. I say, you guys don't know a thing what you're talking about. And not just the taxes, but what the private airlines have got to Indian aviation through competition and low fares has allowed the common man to fly for the last many years now. And now when he's down, when the airline is down on the ground, we want to kick him in the teeth and say, we don't need you. It's mind-boggling.
I think it's a tough situation. Jem, anyone has anything to add? Otherwise, we queue into a.
I think solo, you can talk about the weekend uniforms.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So that was one of the exciting things that we did. Besides
There were
a few
many
others.
exciting things, Solo.
Besides the few others that we did,
Many other.
few on board and few on ground. So so yeah, we had been looking at the existing uniform, and obviously like Sanjeev said, we were hard pressed for cash at that point in time, and we wanted to look at a solution by way we could give the airline a younger, more vibrant personality, which was in line with the overall positioning of the brand that we're trying to create. And we talked about how to possibly create a new uniform for the airline, but it turned out that that was a very, very expensive proposition at that particular point in time. So we said, why not give it a twist? Why not do a workaround and do a weekend uniform? And we started speaking to people outside the company, and if we could get some help in terms of designing it. But eventually we thought we could do a better job of it. And so Sandeep's team, my team, and Sanjeev, we all came together, and we came with this concept of this denim and this smart kurti that we had for the ladies, and the t-shirt and the denim for the boys. And I think it worked wonders. The crew loved it. They all felt like as if they'd been set free from the monotony of wearing a uniform 7 days a week. They had their weekend vibe with this uniform, and it really set it racing for them. They really had very good things to say about it, and it was a first. And many people who saw it were actually taken aback. Oh, can you do a weekend uniform? So it was one of the things where you break away from the norms. You don't do what is conventional, but you still are able to create some kind of a disruption that people take notice about. And brands are about that. They are about acts which create conversations, which create engagement. And people wanted to get a lot of photographs clicked with our crew in these new uniforms. So that also created a lot of user generated content for us.
Plus,
I just want to add something to that. Sorry, guys. Solo, you had touched upon it, but I just want to emphasize the weekend uniform not only was exciting for the crew and for passengers because it was very vibrant orange and red kurtis. Crew could wear either color. But actually, it was a cost-saving initiative because by making the crew wear weekend uniforms 3 days a week, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we issued them one less standard uniform, which is a jacket and everything else. And so jacket, shoes, skirt, blouse, whatever. It's a whole lot for the men, the blazer. So weekend uniform, all we issued was a kurti, which is very cheap, 200 rupees or something, right? And a normal full uniform is a few thousand rupees, and plus shoes, etc. So for the weekend uniform, we said, look, you can wear your own shoes, long as it's black or whatever color. I've forgotten what we defined. I think it was black. You wear your own jeans.
Yeah.
We said the jeans just have to be for the ladies. They should be jegging types, but any shade of dark blue, it should not be torn or faded. But you can wear your own jeans or jeggings. We provide the kurtis for 200 rupees. You wear your own shoes, and we actually saved a bunch of money by doing this. So this was what I think before the term, smart or innovative and all became fashionable. This was just stuff that we did that kill two birds with one stone. And why do we do this crazy stuff? Weekend uniform, the holy dance, the red chili, and all of this. It was to engage our primary stakeholders, which is our own staff, and make them feel excited and motivated again, and to engage our second primary stakeholder, which is our customers, and make them feel that this is not your old SpiceJet. This is a vibrant, interesting, fun new airline, almost a new airline. We did something else very cheap. Our aircraft cabins were not in very good shape. We fixed what we could fix in terms of the mechanics, tightening the tray tables and cleaning the windows and whatever we could repair, we did with the limited budgets. but the seats were pretty old and shabby. Leather had become cracked and all that. So we said, how do we make the cabins look better without spending money? And the headrest covers those days used to be this white tissue paper, looked really shabby. So we just, I think within 2 or 3 weeks, decided that we'll make the headrest covers match the weekend uniform colors. So it would be orange headrest covers for most of the rows and red for the Spice Max rows. And Spice Max was another product we introduced in 2014. And just by putting those slightly thicker, a few paisa more per headrest, slightly thicker, vibrant color, the entire cabin looked almost brand new. I mean, people, when we first walked into that cabin, when the crew walked in, wow, it's like a new aircraft. So there are things you can do, spending very little money, which have a huge impact. And these are all examples of what we did.
The
And the
onboard
playlist.
onboard
Sorry.
music. I think that's your pet thing.
No, I just said one thing we missed out was the playlist on board, which became
Yeah.
a huge conversation
Huge hit.
starter for everyone. Yeah.
There's a fun thing on the playlist. We started playing, 80s music, but not pop. It was more soft rock. And then we started getting some criticism because, like I said, whenever you make some change, there'll be somebody throwing stones at you, saying that you don't know what you're doing. So we started getting some criticism that we're in India, you're an Indian carrier. Why are you playing Western music? You should play Indian music, Hindi music, blah, blah, blah. So one month we decided to play Hindi music, nice songs, not, it was nice, pleasant Hindi music. The amount of complaints we got that have you guys become, so down market, and have you guys become this and become that? And we got 10 times more abuse for playing Hindi music than we went back to English music. And the same thing happened to Vistara. When we started playing music, we got the same set of complaints that why aren't you playing Hindi music? But this time we knew better, so we just ignored those complaints.
Yeah. I mean, I think from the music, I have the entire Vistara playlist. So every time I'd go on a flight, I'd listen to music, and then I'd come back and I'd replicate the playlist on my own phone. So I think the music bit is really good because both of us have loved it, have loved the Spice Jet, the soft rock, and the Vistara. And we've heard similar stuff from a lot of people. It's different and it creates a totally different ambience.
Absolutely. And you know why we play the music that we do at Vistara? I mean, we can talk about Vistara too, long as I'm not revealing any secrets. The reason we play the music we do at Vistara, which is slightly different from what we played in Spice Jet, this is more bluesy, jazzy, even more soft rocky, is that our target segment, the primary profit pool that Vistara is targeting, is a corporate customer, or even if he's a leisure customer, he or she is somebody who went to school and college in the 70s and 80s and grew up to this music. So we want to create a sense of belonging that we don't want to play the most well-known songs. We want to play songs that were popular that people may have not heard for a long time, so that when they hear it on board, they say, oh my God, it's been so long since I heard it. And they feel a certain connect and a belonging, and they start sending Twitter messages saying, what was the song? It's lovely, like you said, Shipra, can I get a playlist? And it's all a part of actually connecting with our primary TG. And I think this idea was taken from Starbucks, actually, not from the actual coffee, but from the brand, where Starbucks said that they wanted to create a third place. People have their homes, their offices, and the third place for them where people can go and just be at home and relax is a Starbucks cafe. So we said, look, we want the Vistara cabin to be a third place for that TG, which I think basis the feedback, it started becoming with the mood lighting and the music and all. It was like a cool place to be in.
Yeah, I want to add on some other bits of what Sanjiv was mentioning about the small things that we did on this one. And while we were in the process of introducing a lot of things, we did a lot of firsts in the Indian skies. And Holy Dance is not what I'm referring to at this point of time. We will talk about the Holy Dance, I suppose, a little later. But small things like we started introducing the birthday and the anniversary cards, the celebrations for the first time ever. So little things. Sanjeev got the IT team to get the birthdays recorded on the passenger manifest, and the crew would look at the list and go plus minus 7 days if you're traveling off your birthday. The crew would actually go up to you with a little card and wish you and sing a little song for you, happy birthday, and wish you anniversary, and give a little something, whatever they could garner on board the aircraft as a little bit. It became a huge hit to such an extent where if by mistake we missed someone, we would actually start getting complaints about the fact saying, hey, you didn't wish me on my birthday. And then we have to go back again the next time and, follow up with that person saying, when are you traveling next? And then kind of make up for that part, saying, look, we're really sorry, but allow us to make it up to you at this point of time. So, that apology card when we made mistakes. So we were the first people who owned up to the fact saying that, look, we're really sorry if we made a mistake and here's an apology card. We would have the airport manager meeting passengers on arrival. There was a handover process that was put in. So if a passenger had a bad experience at check-in or at any touch point throughout their SpiceJet journey, it would just follow through. It would go to the airport, it would go to the in-flight services, go to the arrival airport, and everyone would just handhold and ensure that that one person had a seamless journey throughout, just as a gesture from our side. Not that we wanted to kind of go up and say, hey, listen, forgive us, but it was our way of saying, look, we're really sorry for you having a poor experience, and we just hope that we made a bitter experience less bitter for you. So that the new menu, the partnership between SpiceJet, CCP, and Taj, that was one of a kind. But the first time ever, I mean, when we first spoke with Taj about the fact saying that we're going to tie up with CCD and a tri-party agreement on this part of it, I remember, I think everyone turned around and said, no, it's not possible. But I think we made it happen. And that was as successful as we could get. Many discussions, many back and forths. The in-flight menu was a super hit.
And Sandeep, the answer to not possible, even in the SpiceJet days and thereafter, was, well, if you say it's not possible, we'll find someone who will make it possible. And we don't
Absolutely.
mean well illegitimate ways, but there's somebody who doesn't have no as the automatic first answer. Someone who says, let me try to find a way to make it happen. And I think that's also part of the culture change.
Yeah. And the frontliners saw all these changes. I think one of the most important things, the connect that we started building directly with our customers, I think for the first time ever, and there was a lot of resistance, I must add, when Sanjiv actually first announced this in the boardroom when he did say it, was that every single passenger complaint, if it came through, and we would discuss it. So everything that came through, we would actually discuss the complaints and why did it happen, and there was a complete breakdown of getting to the root cause of why that complaint happened wrong. The HOD of that particular department would have to reach out to the customer directly and make amends. Literally, I mean, the service recovery was done by the HOD themselves. We did not leave it to a third-party call center. We did not leave it to a frontline agent. It was us. We had to get on the phone. We had to seek appointments. We had to call them up. We had to explain the entire scenario and conduct the service recoveries also. I think that was the first, and it was a super hit because I think we got a lot of positive feedback later on where we won passengers for life, literally, if you want to call it that, saying that, look, if it was just one of those automated recorded announcement or someone reading off a script, we would have never come back to you. But for the fact that someone from the management team of the airline actually has taken the effort and the time to reach out to us and explain the entire scenario and actually spelled out what the next steps would be in terms of service recovery and in terms of what corrective actions and measures have been put in place, was absolutely loved by everybody. I think that was another huge hit from that perspective.
We did that at Vistara too,
Sandeep,
Sandeep.
also the fact,
And the reason we did it is, honestly, it wasn't because I think the HODs have too much time on their hands and nothing else to do, so let them play customer service. It was actually to hold their feet to the fire, saying that why should the customer service people, poor people, always be hearing the abuse and apologizing for you? So it's not that every complaint, Sandeep, but everything that got escalated to me and that seemed like an unusual complaint, right? Like a new one that we should nip this in the bud. I would hold the HOD's feet to the fire and say that, look, you get on the phone with customer service, but they will introduce you and you do the talking. And please understand what exactly happened and make sure it doesn't happen again. And you know what happens if you don't hold people's feet to the fire in these situations is that the the customer service person sends an email out, and this happens across companies and organizations. The customer's written a very specific complaint, 10 points, ABCD, this is what happened, very specific time. And we send it to the airport station manager, and the station manager writes back to every point saying, not my fault, not my fault, not my fault, no, customer's lying. And I used to get fed up. I said that the customer cannot be taking so much trouble to write so much detail and to just to lie to us, right? And for the station manager and to everybody else to just say that customers lying, customers always wrong, is completely the wrong way to run a business. So I said, all right, you know what? I don't want this argument on email, that bullet point rebuttal like you guys are writing somebody essay. You get on the bloody phone with the customer and hear it, and almost invariably they would come back and say, no, you're right. I relied on the shift manager and he misled me. Yeah, so a lot of the truth then came out because then nobody could cover up anymore. And I think that's very important in any business.
Well, gentlemen, we'll continue with the stories, but we'll allow the audience to ask some questions. There have been a lot of hands that have been raised and waiting. Give me a moment. I'll just pick up the first one there. Sorry, tech challenged. Nishant, we're coming to you. Unmuting your line.
So basically my first ever, flight as an aviation enthusiast was with SpiceJet on the Q400 from Delhi to Udaipur. Now there was this aircraft, which fascinated me, the Q400. Now, as I started going along, as the years started passing by, I found out that the ATR 72 is much more efficient than the Q400. And since then, I've been finding for this answer that why did SpiceJet go for the Q400 and not the ATR 72?
Okay, let me just answer the question more generally. See, in general, luckily for us, there are usually more than one aircraft that can do the job for the mission that you're looking the job to be done for. For example, the Q400 or ATR mission is short haul, 70, 80 seater, turboprop, fuel efficient, quick turnarounds, easy to load bags, blah, blah, blah. Similarly, if you look at the other end, 787 versus the A330-900 Neo or the A350, 737 versus A320. Luckily for airline customers, there is typically at least two options out there from rival companies. And while you may look at the technical details of the ATR versus Q400 and say, okay, the ATR seems better, ATR 72-600 seems better. What the airline management does is they look at the entire picture. They look at, okay, what is the operating performance of the aircraft in terms of, operating economics? And okay, maybe the ATR is better than Q400, I don't know. What is the revenue potential of the aircraft in terms of number of seats, etc.? What is the acquisition cost of the aircraft? What is the maintenance cost of the aircraft? What is the resale value of the aircraft or the return conditions for the aircraft? What flexibility does the aircraft give you in terms of range, different deployments? What are the parts support agreements that the aircraft have? What are the training requirements and training support that the vendor or the OEM can give you? And you take all of these inputs and put it into a dish and you stir it together and you see what comes out on top. And that's why you have, for the same mission, some airlines have chosen the 787-9, some airlines have chosen A330-900 Neo, some airlines have chosen A350. Is because depending on what was offered or put on the table and the airline specific requirements and the way the airline weighs the importance of different attributes, and you mix it all up together, a different answer may appear. Because they're very good aircraft, they're very close to each other, they're not identical. And maybe on one day, aircraft with lower operating cost loses out because the aircraft maker decides to give you such a great maintenance and purchase cost offer that it more than compensates for the operating costs. And some days the opposite happens, where high operating cost aircraft, slightly higher, is more than compensated for by a better contract for everything else. So that's how it's made. So it's not that, and guys, I know that I'm an av geek. I think most of us on this call are av geeks. And if I had my way, I'd have made SpiceJet buy a 747. But the fact of the matter is that the 747, unfortunately, has been superseded by aircraft that can do the same mission for far less cost. And in fact, Boeing superseded the 747 with the 777-300ER, which would carry almost as many passengers, maybe 30 or 40 less, for half the cost. So you're getting 10% less passengers for 50% less cost. Then the post 747 was history. And I wish it wasn't, but it's history. So that's the way it works.
Right, let's get another question. Tejas, coming to you.
Right. Good evening, gentlemen. So I have a question. I'll say it rather has two segments. One would be for Sanjeev sir to answer. One would be for Solomon to answer. Because SpiceJet, you guys are pretty much the same team which handled SpiceJet and which handled Vistara, the marketing version, where you got in the special liveries of the SG all with all our heart and the SpiceJet, sorry, the Vistara retrojet. Um, then you were the ones who made the customers, the consumers feel a connect with the airline because of introducing all the celebrations on board, off the board, on the ground. You guys were pretty much the ones who also looked at the extensive revenues. In SpiceJet, you guys handled the marketing where you got the marketing advertising on board, off board, on the aircraft themselves as well with the government tourism marketing. So, one, was this a deliberate and conscious action to make the public, make the consumers feel a connect with the airline so that they become frequent flyers with you? Two, the marketing part to generate the revenues. Was it again a deliberate action to get through the crisis during 2014-15 so that you can also market the airline as well as generate revenues parallelly?
So let me take first stab at the answer solo, and then I'll hand it over to you. So
So,
my answer is just at a very high level. Solo will answer the specifics. But basically, when you are not the biggest guy on the block, when you're a number two or number three, there was this rental car company, they still is called Avis. In the old days, in the 70s and 80s, they were number two to Hertz. And the slogan was, "We are number two, so we try harder." Right? And it was a great slogan. Similarly, for both SpiceJet and the LCC, they were number two by far to Indigo. And then Vistara was tiny, even now it is 6-7% market share. So when you're small and you need to punch above your weight, and you don't have the scale and cost advantage that scale brings you, and you don't have that many years, etc., then you need to find a way to differentiate yourself so that customers notice you despite you being small, and differentiate yourself sufficiently so that customers may even be willing to pay a little bit more for you because you offer a more pleasing or memorable experience. So that is the general principle behind it. But Solo, you can go into the specifics.
see, one is obviously the brand part of it. The intent was to make the brand more relatable, create more acts around the brand, which would create conversation. So whether it's delivery, whether it's the uniform, whether it's innovation in terms of product, the Spice Max, which we created, which was the first 4 or 5 rows in the aircraft, which would provide you with a more meaningful product for business and SME travelers, or even things like the acts that we did around festivals, where we bought the airline alive around these acts. So all these things create the an aura around the brand which make it more relatable. And uh, communication, where we put out people as the face of the airline with all our heart, and there's a fervor which creates amongst the folks working for the airline, and then that fervor, it is kind of infection. It goes through to customers across touch points, because then they carry the same passion, the same enthusiasm for all the customers who come in touch with the brand. So I think it is very essential. And like Sanjeev said, we were maybe not the number one guy at that point in time, and therefore at every touch point we wanted to maximize the impact as a brand that we could make. Uh, Coming to the ancillary part of it, most successful airlines, do almost upwards of 20, 25, 30% of their revenue as ancillary revenues. And getting revenue from sources like advertising on board, or our magazine, or meals, is a conscious attempt, which is not a crisis management thing, but it is an ongoing endeavor for airlines to maximize that revenue. You have to see what is it your product, what is the kind of customer segment that you cater to, and then put out the available platforms and available media options that are available to you to possible advertisers. And when you get like-minded brands, which want to connect with a similar kind of an audience as you do as a brand, it creates a more familiar kind of environment even for customers. And I think it's a win-win situation for brands as well as advertisers. This I hope I answer your question.
Yes, of course, all. And Sanjeev sir, thank you so much. These, I mean, the
You're welcome.
answers could not have been better.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, Weber, we're coming to you next. One moment, yeah, go ahead.
So thanks, Ajay, for the opportunity to ask question. And more than asking the question, thank you so much for getting us so close, at least virtually, to our heroes in the aviation industry. To the brand point, which Sanjeev and Solo just mentioned, Sanjeev, I'd like to mention it to you. I once took a flight out from Pune to Delhi, and while I was boarding the flight, I was traveling premium economy. One of those few occasions I've traveled premium economy, and Sanjeev tweeted a picture of his, and I asked him, out of instinct, Sanjeev, do you only travel business class on Vistara? And then he said, no, I travel all three cabins. And by that time, I was in the plane. So I said, here is a CEO. He's responding to one of the many passengers which the airline would have carried today, and he's gracious enough to respond to a passenger. And I'm actually on a plane, which probably Sandeep would have signed the lease deed on or something like that. Made me so close. Feel Made me feel so close to the airline, and I felt
Thank you so much. Very, very kind of you to say that.
yeah. And Sanjeev, I on the taxation point that you bring. Government has taxed the industry heavily, not to mention the inefficiencies in the tax structure which exist. For example, the excise and VAT that you pay on ATF doesn't get offset against your output GST liability that you pay on the passenger revenues. It's almost taxed like a sin industry, which I believe is a part of essential services. They have their own logics. I don't know what it is. So my question is to first part of my question is to Sanjeev, and then maybe to Sudip as well. Sanjeev, you shared your perspective around how you think that this keeping middle seat vacant guidelines of the government post COVID doesn't make a lot of sense, in the sense that if it has to get transmitted, the front row and the back row passengers may anyway get affected. So how do you see, or what is the most optimum way do you see of these operations coming back to normal post COVID? That's number one. And next one is to Sudip, that we may form n number of guidelines on paper, and I'm sorry, no offense to anybody in the audience or the panel, but the way we know Indian crowd is, how Sudip do you think is, how easily is that implementable?
Okay, so let me take the first part. You see, there's no question, no doubt in my mind, in anyone's mind, that we have to take every possible precaution post COVID, not just to protect, but also to reassure customers and our own staff that we are not going to put them at any undue risk. Uh, but everything we do has to logically make sense. And if you're just doing it for optical
Absolutely.
reasons, just to give a sense of reassurance when actually it is not going to make a
Yeah,
difference,
yeah.
then frankly, you need to look at what is the cost of doing that. In terms of the middle seat empty, first of all, it may be a moot point because we don't expect demand to come back immediately. So you may anyway end up with the middle seat empty. But in terms of requiring it to be empty, the gap between the aisle and the window seat is not even 2 feet. So you're not maintaining social distancing there. But the gap between you and the seat in front and behind, especially when they recline, is sometimes 10 inches. So just by keeping one seat empty, you're not actually eliminating the risk. And you're just basically putting a feel good measure out there without any real benefit. And on the margin, it could hurt the airline's revenue when demand comes back. So, but what do you do instead? Now, we're not saying that, just take the chance or take the risk. I think the airports and the ministry and the airlines have all been in discussion for the last 2 or 3 weeks, where there'll be a lot of screening done. There'll be a lot of sanitization done. It'll be mandatory for passengers to wear masks. Crew will be wearing masks and gloves. There'll be temperature checks done. I don't know whether the government will require initially or not to have any more medical documentation or whatever, but everything possible will be done. The in-flight services will be minimized. No walking in the aisles. Hand baggage will be minimized. Uh, Interaction with others, whether it's crew or other passengers, will be minimized. Everything will be minimized, and to reduce the risk as much as possible. Social distancing will happen at the airport, at the boarding gate, during the boarding process, in the bus, in the aero bridge. People will be boarded in groups of 4 or 5. We'll have to have more ground time, which we're all working towards in order to allow that to happen. The aircraft will be all surfaces that are touched by passengers, whether it's the window shade or it's the latch of the tray table or the seat belt or armrest, everything else which is touched by the passenger, the air nozzles on top will all be disinfected between flights. So we'll do everything possible, but we just our stand is just don't put a onerous restriction that doesn't fix anything, but just adds more burden to the airlines in terms of revenues, which anyway we're doing without for some indeterminate period. Yeah.
Sudip?
Yeah. So what Sanjiv talked about, all this, task if the airline is supposed to carry out, it's going to increase the turnaround time by a big margin, and that would also impact the revenue collections. It would mean lesser number of flights in a day by the same aircraft. How the question that you have, Vaibhav, is how do you ensure that people listen to it? I think DGCA guidelines are quite strict, and it just takes the airline to implement those guidelines. I remember in 2014, September, October, suddenly there was a spurt of irate customers misbehaving on flight. Not only SpiceJet, but various other airlines. And thereafter, we started carrying zip ties in the cabin. And the captain was empowered to have people, handcuffed. And that's, I think, still carried in the airlines. I don't know, Sanjiv would be better.
It is, yes.
And so the captain is empowered to ensure that people behave. So I don't think there would be any problem of ensuring people behave. Have I answered your question?
Yeah, you have more than clearly. Thank you so much. And Sanjeev, I have a confession to make. Just before, until the time you left Vistara, I was the one tweeting to you to start an evening flight from Delhi to Pune, because last flight out of Delhi of Vistara was 5:35, and it was inconvenient to catch that flight, completing your work commitments. So I would, every time that I would fly to Delhi, and once I also got a response from your networks team. They said, we have this on our agenda, we'll plan, just a confession to make. Thanks.
Yeah, see,
Thanks so much.
See, I think obviously any airline will want the best flights possible for their business model. And I'm sure Vistara would want a better timed evening flight. The constraint was slots. Pune has no slots available, but now after COVID, I expect that capacity will come down for some time. So maybe some slots will open up. So I'm sure there'll be 1 or 2 people in Vistara listening to this call, and they might take the suggestion back to them.
Okay, General, we'll come back to the audience questions in a bit. But one of the questions I've been dying to ask is, what is the story about the Holi on the plane? What happened there? Why play? I mean, there's enough place on the ground. Why play Holi?
Sandeep is on the video, yeah. Sandeep.
Your story.
That was Sandeep's idea.
I think perhaps one of the most controversial, but it actually put us on the map, didn't it? It really did. I mean, people who didn't know about SpiceJet suddenly knew about SpiceJet. There was the video floating around all over. People were liking it. The traffic grew. Solo was very happy with the entire bit. I mean, so this started off as a conversation. I think Solo, between you
Let's
and
do something around Holi.
Let's do
So we
something
started
around Holi.
let's do something around Holi. Yeah.
let's do
because
something
that was
around
the
Holi.
first big festival coming up in 2014, and we wanted to do something which would be buzzworthy, which would engage our employees, which would create the right traction, or pull the right triggers with our customers, and give us the required visibility that we were really hungry for at that point in time. So yeah, that is how it started off.
Yeah, so it was that, and then one discussion led to another, and it was supposed to be a flash dance. We were supposed to do it on ground first, and then we were we decided that it should be done in flight, and and of course the rest is history as such. No, but a lot of effort went into the entire thing. I don't want to make light of the entire bit, but a lot of effort went into the. We actually hired a choreographer, and
Yeah.
choreographer, yeah, the entire song. The song was decided by Sanjiv. I think in solo went with
We
two
went up with
songs.
two songs. We went up with the recommendation for two songs. One which
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, we having that discussion, and Balam Pichkari was one, and the other one was
Rang Barse.
Rang Barse. Yeah, Rang
Balam
Barse.
Barse. And since Sanjeev is a big Deepika fan, he obviously picked Balam Pichkari. So,
Little did we
and,
know, that I would become an even bigger fan of hers. Yeah.
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 So
So
and then we worked with very closely with Sandeep's team in terms of identifying who are these people that we would want to put on board. What is the process that we would follow? How would we go about ensuring that in no way do we make any compromises in terms of the security of the aircraft or the safety of passengers, etc. We follow all the rules. We had two sets of crew on board, one which was the performing crew, one which was the operating crew. We ensured that all these crew who were trained for it were made aware and made opted in with a very informed. It was an informed decision for them as to what is it that they will be going out and doing. Though we revealed it only at the last day, but
last month,
yeah. And also their training, the dance routine which they practice was keeping in mind that they will have restricted movement. They will be only be able to allow to do very restricted moves within the galley of the aircraft, and that's how it worked out. I and Sandeep are both on that side.
But
and,
Sanjeev took no DGCA permission.
Sorry?
Sanjeev took no DGCA permission. So
Sandeep didn't know it was required because it was done in airlines elsewhere around the world. And because, as Solo said and Sandeep said, the choreographer made sure that we first placed the crew at even distances down the aisle, 4 or 5 crew. And most of the movements were hand twirling movements. So there was no real vigorous, there was not a bhangra going on there.
Yeah.
And but we didn't think that this needed, the amount of activity that the crew did for the dance, the weight and balance issue, etc. You have more weight and balance issue when you're wheeling the meal cart down the aisle. So we didn't really think there was an issue, but they turned out to be one. But eventually it got resolved very happily. And it put us in the news for many days. And I think I've said this to many people. First, my mother called me to see whether I still had a job. And then after some time, I got a message from Mr. Maran. I think SL called me to say that, so Mr. Maran wants to know, you made the crew dance on the flight. And remember, the board or the promoters that time didn't want to micromanage. So they said, look, you do whatever you think is. So I said, oh God, that means that I really have pissed somebody off. And so I said, yeah. He says, well, he's got a message for you. Can you make them dance every day because revenues have shot up? So that's the good-natured way in which he took it. And the main thing that I guess we learned is that next time, advise the DGCA before you do it. And in fact, the very next year, 2015, by that time, Ajay had come on board. Ajay was very keen to do it again on board in flight. And we were working with the DGCA to get the permissions. And his whole point, and I completely, supported him on this, is that, look, there was no violation. It was cleared up. So why should we hold back? And we want to show that SpiceJet, after going through a near-death experience, is back with its full vigor. So he was keen. We did it again in flight. But then we talked about it internally and we said that'll be too much of a repetition of what we did in the past. So instead, we did a very nice flash mob in Delhi airport on the ground in T1, which I think also was a huge hit. It's less talked about, But because it was on the ground, we had like 40 or 50 crew participating, and it was fantastic. And that started the whole airline flash mob thing at airports, which nowadays, it's quite common. But those days, these were the sort of trend-setting events.
Just one more thing, Ajay, that I'd like to add is, the timing for us was perfect. This was around March or April of that year. And by that time, we had kind of sorted out most of the other issues plaguing the airline. Our on-time performance was in place. Customers were happy. We had built the necessary loads. People were wanting to fly SpiceJet because of, the brand preference. We got our acts on the network, and we had got our act on the revenue management piece, going well at that point in time. And therefore, we were very confident that, we were not just going out to position ourselves as, someone who's very frivolous and, just wants to attract some attention. Because we had everything else going in line, we went out and did this. That gave us the confidence to go out and do it.
In fact, I want to just jump in there solo. You raise a very important point, which we've not touched upon, that it wasn't all just marketing and song and dance.
Yeah.
The very first thing we did in December or November 2013 was we sat down with a clean sheet of paper. Literally, we had 57 aircraft, 42 737s and 15 Q400s. And we sat down with our network planning and revenue management and marketing and sales teams. And we used to work till 10 or 11 at night every day, saying that let us redraw the network from scratch. Aircraft one, where should it fly? Aircraft two. And literally for a couple of weeks, and then we hired a consulting firm to help us do the number crunching behind this. But the entire network was redrawn from scratch. And luckily, those days you still had sufficient slots so that you could do that. Now it's very difficult to do this. Secondly, we also asked questions that nobody had asked. We said, look, why are we flying this flight every early morning, late night, Bombay, Ahmedabad, early morning, Ahmedabad, Bombay? It's loss making. It is ridiculous. Why are we doing this? And it turned out that even back then, Bombay had a parking bay problem at night. And the answer was, we're flying this because we can't park the aircraft overnight in Bombay, so we're taking to Ahmedabad. We said, but every other airline is doing the same thing because there are like 5 flights leaving at the same time, we're all staying the night in Ahmedabad. So how about we do Goa? So everybody looked around the room and said, but nobody parks aircraft in Goa. And we said, why not? They said, I think there's a rule. It's a naval airfield. They may not allow it. I said, has anybody asked them? So remember Debashish, who was still there with SpiceJet. He said, let me ask. And he called up. He was in network planning. He called up whoever the relevant parties. They said, yeah, sure. Park and Goa. So we said, okay. So just for the purpose of parking somewhere else and not just doing the same thing and losing money in Ahmedabad, is let's give it a shot and we'll park the aircraft overnight in Goa. And lo and behold, the flight turned out to be an extremely profitable one because it turns out that there are a lot of people who want to go to Goa at night, gamble, and come back in the morning, early morning. We did not know that. And now today there are lots of late night flights into Goa and back early in the morning. And now no parking bays available in Goa because everybody else followed. But again, it was just a question of we did not take anything as cast in stone, as not possible. We just re-looked at everything. Revenue management is important. Kanish, who's not on this call, on this conference, we hired him from Air Asia, when Air Asia, Malaysia this is, where of course Air Asia was known for its zero, zero ringgit sales, etc. And he came on board and he said, let's do a 0 rupee sale. And then we looked at the rules and all. We said, look, our system may not be able to handle it, or there may be some regulations saying you cannot give away the product for free. So let's make it 1 rupee. But actually, it was a 1 rupee base fare. And we collected taxes. It came out to about 700 or 800 rupees. But what the people didn't realize is that it was 1 rupee one way, but on the return leg, you had to pay the regular fare. And the average fare you got was about together about 1,500 rupees, which is not a lot of money, but we were only putting the distressed capacity on sale, and you had to make at least, if not 30 days, if not 90 days, at least 60 days advance booking. So this is distressed capacity we put on sale with 60 or 30 or 90 days advance booking requirement. And the marginal cost of carrying an extra passenger in those days, if the flight is already operating, was about 600 rupees or 500 rupees. So if you're making 12 or 1,500 rupees, you're making money on the passenger, on the marginal cost basis, because the aircraft is flying anyway, the seat is flying anyway, and it's flying empty. And through doing that, I remember we had beefed up our servers, saying that okay, there'll be lots of calls, etc. But our entire system crashed. Our phone lines were clogged. The website crashed. Everything just because but we sold about, on a typical day, those days we would sell maybe 50,000 seats, tickets, and we sold about 300,000 that day. And it was amazing. And what it did was it's changed the entire revenue management approach in airlines, where airlines no longer flew as many empty seats around, and they did it smartly. You don't want to discount at the last minute, but you want to discount in advance. The last minute passengers are the least price sensitive. And I think the revenue performance of SpiceJet definitely went up by about 20% over the course of the year, the revenue per ASK. And other airlines followed. And they initially hated us for doing it, but then they followed us. Now everyone does it. You know, almost everything that we did that was criticized roundly, whether it's the holy dance or the showmanship or the 1 rupee fare or Spice Max or having Q400s in the fleet, everything that people said, oh, SpiceJet doesn't know what they're doing, everybody's doing now. SpiceJet has more Q400s, Indigo's bought ATRs, everybody does fare sales, everybody does flash mobs. So it's just a different way of doing things. People were used to it, but I think it fundamentally changed the Indian aviation industry in that it triggered the growth in passenger loads by having these fares in these so-called flash sales that allowed 15 to 20% more passengers to travel with the same aircraft capacity. Now that is where the 15-20% annual growth started. Then eventually airlines started bringing in more aircraft because the growth kept happening. But then, of course, in my opinion, it went too far. I think we got too much capacity now. But the entire growth that we talk about was triggered due to revenue management and just stimulating demand.
I agree, Sanjiv. I think this twice I've tried to get my hand on 1 rupee fares. First one was Air Deccan, I think. They had launched flights, I don't know, 2005 or something. And at that point in time, they had these fare sales. And I remember as a writer about aviation, I had put out notification that you guys were putting out these 1 rupee fare sales. And I remember, I mean, we got a lot of traffic that day because people were complaining that your servers were down. So they used to, write a comment on our place. And but yeah, I guess there are fun stories behind that too. But gentlemen, so what I'm taking away here right now is it's a lot about communication. It's about innovative thinking, and it's a lot about having fun on the job while you're at it. So, is there anything? I think we're already 1 hour 45 minutes into this, so perhaps time to wrap it up. And is there perhaps I'd like you to let you guys go, but before that, one fun memory from SpiceJet, or three of you have worked as a team together, even at Vistara. So one fun memory from your time working together, I guess, before we let you go.
I'll go last, please.
Who's going first?
You pick.
Okay.
So should we start with the one who's farthest from us, Sandeep?
Okay.
I think one of the funnest memory that I have, apart from all the fun things that we did, all the nice things that we did, this is about the intrigue that I always had about how Sanjiv managed to manage an airline with a BlackBerry, and why that BlackBerry never just blew up one fine day with all the pressure and the load that went on again on it all the time. And that continued all.
WhatsApp, huh?
Sorry?
That was before WhatsApp. In Vistara, I think I've been even worse. Huh?
Yeah, I mean, so just imagine, in those days we were using emails as WhatsApp and as chat messages, if I recall. So we would go back and forth on that part of it, and how you would manage to run the entire bit from your BlackBerry. And you continued all it through in Vistara also. I recall that in the initial, till you actually decided to move to another brand from there, is something that was always fun, and it amused me and quite a few of my colleagues. Must say that.
I had the last BlackBerry on earth.
Just to add,
possibly.
To add what Deep said, there was this one flight which he was taking on Qatar. Remember, where we were hoping that he would switch off and we would get a respite. And somehow he managed to get on that flight and latch on to the Wi-Fi on board, and he sent us a mail. I'm back, and there we were.
No, so now that we have you here, I mean, BlackBerry used to make well, different kind of people. I used to work till 3 a.m. when I had my BlackBerry on me. But what's your fun memory from working with this team?
Well, there are enough, but I'll make a confession. I got Sanjiv hooked on to Twitter, so that's my take on those SpiceJet days. Where we and there was a reason behind it. Not many people were willing to write our story, but since we were doing customer service well on Twitter, we were handling it the right way. There was enough traction, and that is where I pushed him to get onto Twitter and put our voice out, put our message out through the platform, because there were a lot of interested people who were following us, who wanted to hear our side of the story. But then rest is history.
Yep, Blue Tick Sanjeev, as I call him now.
Yeah.
Okay, Colonel, we're gonna come to you.
Okay, so this wasn't fun then, but it became fun later. This was the time when OTP was a big thing. And everyone was trying their best to ensure that the turnaround was on time and things worked on time, and we needed to take off before before the slot expired. And this, I had gone to Mumbai and for a visit, and somehow that day the loaders were not there. And I remember Captain Puneet Nagi was the captain. I think I saw him.
He's here.
Yeah. So Puneet Nagi was there, and there were no loaders, and there were bags to be loaded. So Ashmat Bashir was the assistant manager in Mumbai, and she and I and one more person, I think, the three of us were loading bags. And Captain Puneet Nagi was screaming at the top of his voice that I'm going to leave you and go. I don't care if the bags get on or not, I am going. And we were saying just one more, and just one more. And between the three of us, we loaded all the bags and we managed to get off on time. So that's a good memory.
Are you on the call? Raise your hand if you are. We want to hear your side of the story. I know Puneet signed up, but I'm trying to find him here.
Yeah, I saw him for a bit, I think.
Yeah, perhaps he logged out.
Ajay, there's a Mr. Balasubramaniam who's been wanting to ask a question. He's been with the airline industry for over 40 years. So can we just get in the last question from him?
Yes, let's do that. Mr. Balasubramaniam P, right?
Yes, that's
yes.
right. Hi, Sandeep. I'm a great fan of. Thank you. I'm a great fan of yours. Watching the 2-minute, every day. Literally looking forward to that. And I made a few comments to you as well on that.
Thank you.
And one of the things, I joined Air India when J.R.D. Tata was my chairman. So you know what I mean. You
Yes.
understand the sort of glorious days that we went through. Second thing is, you touched a very important point of your Srinagar experience, where literally you people went and did the whole thing, not just for self-patting, not for somebody to say you have done a good job, but really just to help the country. But the perception seems to be, immediately you talk about any repatriation, Air India. I'm not saying that Air India should not get the name. They should get the name, and correctly so. But why that perception cannot be extended to say, no, the private carriers also, could be SpiceJet, could be Go Air, could be anybody, doesn't matter, also have the national sense of duty, and they do a lot. I think that communication probably should be a little bit more from people like you, Sanjeev, because you're not self-patting. You are doing something good for the industry and for knowledge of the public. And COVID-19 is today. This morning's newspaper, they talk about repatriation, only the name Air India is there. They have not even talked about others. Probably all of you have spoken to MOCA and you have made some arrangements there. So I think that's a very good service you'll be doing for the whole Indian aviation industry if you do that. And I would like to hear from you on that.
Thank you. I think you raise a very, very interesting point. First of all, yes, it's not just SpiceJet or Air India. Every airline has been consistently doing, stuff. This is not for CSR. CSR is only when you're profitable. Most airlines are not. They do it genuinely to help. I know Vistara also, we have helped. We flew medical supplies, medical personnel and relief workers for free down to Kerala in 2018 and then back again for free. We set up a special team to handle that. Uh, After the Pulwama attacks, we flew the families of the injured and the deceased, sadly, for free to Srinagar or Jammu and back, and many other things. But I think the general nature of at least the airlines I've been in is that when you're doing good things, it should not be a marketing opportunity.
Sure.
You should do it because of the real reason. But so that's a part of it. The second part as to why Air India during the COVID, it's very logical. The two reasons why they'd be the first ones to do it. First of all, I want to make it clear that when the government has a right to ask any airline to commandeer or charter aircraft from any airline during a national emergency on charter rates, commercial charter rates. So all these flights are done on a payable basis. Even Air India bills the government for whatever flights they're doing.
Yes.
But why is it that is Air India? It's two good reasons. One, it's government owns the airlines, so it's easiest to go to them. And number two, they have the largest aircraft with the longest range. So when you want to evacuate people from China or from Italy, there's no point in sending three A320s when you can send one 747-400. So those are the two obvious reasons why Air India is the first choice. But I have to make it clear, as far as I know, every airline has written to the government offering our aircraft for repatriation flights. We have also written saying that if at any time the government wants to transport migrant labor by air within India, we are ready to perform those flights. And so we're on standby to be called. So it's not at all a case that that the airlines are somehow not active at this point. We're active and on standby and ready to be called at any time.
Thanks. It is to communicate to the general public. That's what I'm talking about. More, not to suspect, but to communicate.
But you see, again, that goes back to my first point that I don't think most of us are doing this for marketing purposes. We're doing this, out of genuine reasons, and maybe through this conversation is getting communicated. I don't know. But it is important to communicate. Only now I've started communicating this more, not because we want to pat ourselves on the back, but because of this whole narrative that you private airlines don't deserve any support whatsoever. And that's the reason why I'm communicating some. Yeah.
That was the point I came to. Thank you very much, Sanjiv. Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much.
Right. Sanjiv, I have one question, which is something I'm asking all four of you. You're still not off the hook for your fun memory from Spice or Vistara, but we'll close that last. For all four of you guys, a lot of questions coming in. What do you think? I mean, and this is more a current contextual question. A lot of people are waiting in their wings to make careers in aviation, and everyone's kind of asking the same questions. Is it a good time? What is your advice to these folks who are trying to make careers in aviation at this point in time? And this is a question for all four of you. It's not just for Sanjiv.
Okay, so I'll go last then.
Okay, I'll go first because I've spent the least time in aviation.
Okay.
Amongst all four of us. I think aviation is a wonderful sector to work in. It's fantastic. It's challenging, and there's a huge amount of growth which is possible for you if you can do well. If you look at Sanjiv, he's been in aviation throughout his life, so he's made a career out of aviation. So people who are getting in, should read the book which Sanjiv will probably publish sometime, and about your life in aviation, and there are various. It doesn't mean being in aviation doesn't mean doing one particular thing. There are so many verticals in aviation. You can work in any of those, depending on what your strengths are, and it's something which will never go out of style. I mean, for COVID, things are shut down, but people will travel. And since people will travel, there will always be airlines.
I totally agree. Sandeep?
I agree. I think Colonel's kind of put it correctly. This is a short-term thing, the whole COVID bit and the reduction in demand and services and in the fleet rationalization that is happening at this point of time is a short duration bit. The fundamental need to travel will still remain. People will travel, for leisure, for business, and just regularly. People will travel. Right now may not seem very bright in terms of opportunities that are available at hand for anybody, but give it time. I think it's a fantastic industry to be in. And also one more thing that Colonel mentioned, saying don't just look at the operational aspect of it. You know, an airline is not just about being a pilot or a cabin crew or an engineer. There is so much more that is there to an airline. I mean, between sales and marketing and revenue management and customer service and call centers and airport services and HR and there's so much that is happening, and you can contribute to this wonderful industry by being a part of any of this part of it. The bit is make yourself relevant. That's the more important thing. Utilize this particular time when the opportunities are less to make yourself more qualified and more relevant. That is the important message for anyone out there right now who wants to make a career for the future. But don't give up is the message, is the larger message.
Solo?
Yeah, so as Sandeep and Colonel said that, obviously this is a tough time. It's not only a tough time for aviation, but a whole lot of other industries also. So the impact on aviation may be a little more. Aviation may take a little longer to recover, but it will definitely be back. But since they mostly covered all the points about, the prospects and opportunities within aviation, two things are important. You need to have your heart in the right place because it's people's business. And the other thing is, like most of us say, you need jet fuel in your wings. It's a very agile industry. You should be up to the task. You should be willing to make the necessary changes on the fly, and you should be ready to play ball and innovate. And that is what is required to be in this industry. And I think these skills will be more in demand as we get along because it will become more and more challenging to operate. It will be a tougher industry to operate. It will need people with more ideas and brighter minds like you guys who are coming up now and are looking for jobs to come up and define what the future of this industry is going to be. So I think there will be opportunity, maybe not immediately, but yes, more in the future.
Sanjiv.
Okay, I think. All right, so just give me a moment. My mobile phone decided that it was time to collapse. I hope it's back now.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think, all right. It's upside down. It'll work better now. Okay, so I think most of the key points have been made. I know it's not easy sometimes to get an entry into the industry. In any industry, people say that, look, in order to join an industry, you have to have experience in the industry. So how it's a vicious cycle. How do I get industry if you don't take people without experience? But there are entry-level jobs in the airline industry. If you're passionate, reach out to the airlines. Right now is not a great time, but when things start normalizing, I know that at Vistara, we had an internship program. And in fact, much of the core of the network planning team at Vistara were avgeeks, and who I reached out to, who I had HR reach out to, actually proactively, to say that, look, if you can, be so passionate and study airline schedules and make suggestions and write blogs in a free time, imagine what you can do if we paid you for it. And so passionate people, always have a role. If you know people in industry, this is true for anywhere in the world, in any industry. It helps being noticed. At least somebody can say, look, you've got 1,000 resumes, but this guy's really passionate. I know because I know him personally, whatever. That could help you get noticed. But eventually it's not just passion. You have to be good at your job, right? And you have to be better at your job than I am at keeping my mobile phone mounted. So that's a key requirement. And okay, so that's it. So you guys just have to keep at it and follow your passion and be patient because this is not a great time. Sajay, do you want me to come to the last one memory? I thought of two, but I think I'll stick with the funny one. Yeah.
No, you have to.
Now, the funny one I said already in the last, I think in the last webinar we did, but audience might have been different. But this is a great story which I love to tell, and I think I don't know if Sudip was there, but I know the other three were there when this happened. Basically, we had a tradition. Well, we tried to have a tradition as SpiceJet where once a year at the annual board meeting, annual general meeting, each department head would present in person to the board and to the chairman. It's not just the CEO, the CFO presenting, but so we took a conference room at the Holiday Inn in AeroCity, and the entire board was there, and the entire senior management team was there, and everybody went through their presentations, etc. And it was great because, and we wanted every HOD to have visibility and defend their own business plan and so on and so forth. So all that went well. But towards the end, we started, having some lighthearted banter, and then Mr. Maran in person this time said, "So Sanjeev, you made the people crew dance." I mean, that really caught his fascination. He's a media guy after all. So I said, yes. He said, no, that really worked well. That was a fantastic thing. He said, what is next? He didn't say make them dance again this time. He said, what is next? What are you guys thinking of doing next to sort of, get some good visibility and generate sales? So I said, well, look, I don't think we can make the crew dance again. That might be, pushing it too far. But I read recently that Richard Branson and Tony Fernandez had a bet, and the loser of the bet would have to dress up in female cabin crew clothes and serve on the rival's airline. So, and apparently what happened is that Richard Branson had to wear the AirAsia uniform or something and serve on an AirAsia flight, a female uniform. So as I was telling this story, Mr. Maran started laughing and said, "Oh, I know where you're going with this, but we are different. We promoters stay in the background here. But here we make our CEOs wear the crew uniform. So you will wear the uniform and serve now on my behalf." And everybody started laughing. And I guess the reason why this sticks in my head is because we were all there, all involved. B, because it shows a behind the scenes look at what was considered to be very dangerous and controversial, but which actually was was a significant positive event. And C, it gives a peek into how even the most serious boardrooms and serious promoters, etc., are also human beings, and they have a fun side. And spirits were really improving at SpiceJet, and things were really going well before, unfortunately, things took a turn for the south for reasons we discussed earlier. But I really want, personally, the three colleagues who are on this call, I wish we could have had more, but the three of them, Sudip, Sandeep, and Solo, were instrumental during those days of the entire culture change and attitude change and, the entire experience change that happened. So I'm glad that we had this chance for all four of us to share some of the stories. And thank you guys for agreeing to do this, and Ajay and Shipra for setting this up.
No, well, pleasure's all ours. Guys, there's a lot of questions still, but I'd advise you reach out to Sanjeev on Twitter.
Well, are we short of time? Are you guys? We can go on for another 10 or 15 minutes, just answering questions, because I know a lot of people have questions, and please shut up and just answer questions.
Lovely.
Maybe
That'd
we
be
should
nice.
take
So yeah, I'll just
quick
go.
ones, yeah.
Now we'll go one by one. Nehal, coming to you next. Just.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was the guy messaging you, sir. So you did say someone has to reach out to a personal, etc. There are two instances. I'm going quite personal on this because I remember I did reach out to a HR, and within 1 month I was selected for the internship procedure in Vistara. But after a month, I call her and she says she left Vistara. That's one. And my question has always been one. I see that all international airlines abroad, be it Cathay, Singapore, or anything, for their own citizens have always provided certain internships. That exactly answer to my question of getting that prior experience in the industry. But I see that none of the private players, airlines in India have been doing so. Because I did secure an internship in airport through contact, but I could never get into airlines being an AV geek. One thing that's common between all of us is that small hashtag AV geeks, and I thrive on it. And so I just wanted to, your message for the same.
I shared my suggestion. Maybe reach out to HR again, telling them exactly what you just said on this call. And right now, I don't think there's going to be too many internships or anything, because everybody is now in a crisis mode. But when things normalize, reach out and just tell them exactly what you told us, and I'm sure they'll respond to you.
I guess there's a question from Tejas. Yes, go ahead.
Right. So I have a question for all four of you. In these volatile times, of course, and you can choose not to answer because of reasons. You guys are in the industry. Due to COVID, due to the impact of COVID-19, which are the airlines, personally, which airline do you feel is the most vulnerable to administration? Because Sanjeev, we all have been following you, sir, and you have been kept on updating us on your Twitter. The airlines like Virgin Australia, South African, Flybe, they have all gone under self-administration. So which big airlines or which airlines in the Indian subcontinent are the most vulnerable to administration in these volatile times?
Okay, so I obviously cannot name airlines by name, but
Right.
the larger point I want to make in response to your question is that this is like a tsunami, what is happening. Uh, in fact, what is happening to the airlines is like COVID itself. The tide will first take the weak, and then will come after the strong. Nobody is immune to this, which is why in the West and in the East, all around India, you have some of the strongest, most profitable airlines with the largest cash balances in the world getting financial support from the governments, Lufthansa being the latest, 10 billion euros. The US carriers, they all have huge cash balances, very profitable, but even the huge cash balances will not last more than a few months because, cash burn for Delta Airlines was $100 million a day. $100 million is about 700 crores, almost 750 crores a day. So you run through your cash balance, 10 days is $1 billion. So even if you have a $30 billion cash balance in, not in 3 months, you're out of it. So my only response is that, look, everybody is vulnerable. This is not business as usual. This is not a crisis of the airline's own making or anybody's own making. However, the outcome for the industry, if airlines start collapsing here the way they are doing in other parts of the world, is not good because airlines they're a essential infrastructure industry, I believe. Ironically, airports are given that label, but not airlines, which I don't understand. But anyway, so if airlines start collapsing and only one or two are left, if you're lucky, one or two are left, maybe even one or two are not left. What will happen to the economy? What will happen to consumers? Your capacity will go down, your prices will go up, your choices will go down, your frequencies will go down, your economy will suffer. And the reason the US, for example, the US was the most transparent in describing why they're giving aid to the airlines. They gave $25 billion of grant to the airlines, and they're offering another $25 billion, so $50 billion altogether as loans, low interest loans guaranteed by the government. For the grant, they said, look, take this money. And this is to airlines at Delta, which is the most profitable airline in the world. They had $4.4 billion profit last year, $45 billion revenue last year. So the reason they're giving this money is they said that, look, pay your employees till October. So they're paying the salaries for all staff till October. They've got a certain ratio mechanism to ensure that everyone gets paid. And they've done a calculation which says that, look, it is better that we keep the employer alive so that after October, you can pay your own staff rather than let the airlines collapse and then your staff go on unemployment benefits. And then we lose out not only on your payroll tax and everything else, all the other taxes the airline generates. We also have to then start paying unemployment benefits. And they did the math and they said that comes out to $25 billion. So why should we give $25 billion as unemployment benefits and as foregone taxes rather than give it to the airline and keep the employer alive so that the problem after October hopefully goes away rather than becoming a permanent problem? So that is a kind of thinking that is required. And no, I can tell you this, no airline in the world is safe. No, not even the strongest airlines in the world is safe because it is unprecedented that you're not flying at all in India, and in other countries you're flying maybe 5% or 10% of your normal capacity while maintaining these kind of fixed costs. This is crazy. It is a crazy situation, and I think
And
critics don't understand it's a crazy situation. Critics want to score brownie points or technical points by saying, oh, you're doing this, you're doing that. All right, fine. We'll do it exactly the way you want us to. All the airlines will be dead. We'll be happier then. So this is not business as usual.
Right. Thanks, Sanjeev. Anybody else wants to chime in on that, gentlemen?
I think he's answered.
All right.
I think it's been answered very well.
Yeah. Right. We're coming to Ram Kumar.
That's me again. I need a better phone solution. Okay.
Or maybe this is your phone saying it's been on for too long now, 2 hours.
No, actually my phone stopped charging, so I'm trying to fix that. So anyway, guys, please carry on.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ajay, for hosting this insightful meeting. My question to the panel is, once the flights restart, I assume there will be reduced meal service and restrictions on lounge access. So in this scenario, how would airlines respond to creating an appealing factor towards premium travel, which is business and probably premium economy? How would airlines to make it more appealing? Maybe double mileage on frequent flyer programs or other incentives?
See, my view, and I'm not with Vistara anymore, but my view very much is that we are in a situation where even when we resume flying, it is not going to be business as usual for a long time. And I don't think corporate travelers are also going to be worrying about, oh my God, I'm not getting my hot towel. I think they're going to be worrying more about the fact, the safety and their well-being during the flight, safety from the point of view of the pilots, not the aircraft. Of course, airlines may do things to give more points, etc. But I just think that the Indian consumer has shown, the Indian public has shown during this crisis that they understand it's a crisis. The way they have largely followed the lockdown, etc. And it is not going to be business as usual. And I don't think people traveling in business class or premium economy are going to expect it. And we just have to wait to see when will things come back to normal. It is when we can start taking the masks and gloves off. And when will that happen? Well, either if everybody, well, three possibilities. Either everybody gets immunity, herd immunity as they call it. Second, the virus is miraculously disappears like President Trump has been hoping for a while. And the third is if a vaccine is developed. So the middle one, the virus disappearing, has happened before. I mean, SARS and MERS and all, they disappeared, right? But in this case, it doesn't look like it's happening, unfortunately. Herd immunity is a very risky long-term thing, and vaccine hopefully in the next 1 year. So I don't think, at least in the next 1 year, maybe even longer, things are going to be normal. We have to forget the days where we flew and drank our wines and had our Starbucks and enjoyed it and took photos with the crew and fellow passengers and did retro flights. I think all that is history for a while now.
I think I want to add in there, Ram, we just wrote about today how Vistara is going to change their service protocols. It does not talk about lounge, but there is a lot of things that will change. Everything that's not a seat basically goes away. You get to the airport, you get a seat assigned, you don't get reading materials on the plane. I think it's going to be bare basics for a while, from the feedback that we're getting from other airlines as well at this point in time. So yeah, well, lounges, least of our worry at this point in time.
And I just want to make one point. When people, a lot of people ask that, look, how much do you expect demand to fall or the business to shrink? It doesn't take a lot for demand to fall. I mean, suppose each of us used to make, 2 trips a month, and now because we don't want to travel as much, we reduce it to 1 trip a month. 50% reduction in demand right away. 50% right there. Even if we were taking 4 trips a month and we decide to make it 3 trips a month, which is quite possible, I think, very, very, very possible. That's a 25% reduction in demand right there. When airlines are operating on margins of 5% or 6 or 7%, a 25% reduction in your revenue can kill you. Even that can kill you. That is how serious the situation is.
I agree. I guess, I think it's a matter of time before things normalize and airlines will go back into doing sales and, kind of whetting appetite again. Let's get into the next question. Bringing Prashant. I think I have 2 more questions here. So let me unmute Prashant. Prashant, go ahead with your question.
Hey, thanks, Ajay. I hope everyone can hear me now.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I have 3 questions for 4 of you.
Wow.
Anything is appreciated. So yeah.
Can you speak?
First question would be
mouthpiece, please. We can't hear you very clearly. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me better now?
It's better.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So my first question is, which airline market do you think would rebound the fastest in the crisis, given that governments are different and the rules and regulations, employees and getting back employees are different across markets. Like in Europe, it's quite different compared to US or in India as such, because we still do not have any clarity about governments helping in Indian and Asian markets. So that would be my question number one. And the second question is, it's related to an airline. It's a scenario that every airline could face in the future or in any crisis. So we've been looking at LH, Lufthansa's denial for government's funding because the government has asked in for a seat at the board of directors. What do you think about government's hand at an airline operation when they provide when they do help an airline out of a crisis?
Can we just drop it 2 questions, please, in the interest
Yes,
of time?
please. Yeah, okay. That I would appreciate these two. Thank you.
But I forgot the first one.
Which airline market do you think would rebound the fastest? Because market scenarios are different and employee loss.
The markets which have large domestic markets will rebound faster simply because you just need one government to decide, how the lockdown gets removed. So I think domestic flights will resume faster. So that way, India and the US and China, 3 largest domestic markets, and maybe Russia are well positioned for that, and Brazil and others. You get the picture. Whereas airlines which are dependent a lot on international traffic, which includes, the city-state airlines, Singapore Airlines, Emirates, Qatar, to some extent British Airways, because the UK is a very small country, comparatively speaking, will take longer, I think, to regain the traffic because they have to depend on 3 countries to at least 2 and maybe 3 countries to unlock, which is their home country and the 2 countries that they are flying passengers between through their home country. And I think the general perception is that governments are going to really still restrict their borders. So they don't want any foreigners coming in with infection and with the virus, but they will be gradually taking some more chances or risks, calculated risk with their own people, allowing their own people to get to work, etc. So that's first. Second question regarding Lufthansa board seat. Look, that the government is offering a package which includes equity, which means that equity means they're taking an ownership stake of a few percent in the airline. And typically, when you have an ownership stake of a few percent in an airline, you can ask for a board seat. Now, equity is one way to do it. Is one way to give aid. It's not the only way. There are many other ways to assist. In the US, the government is also giving grants, in exchange for which they're asking for a small, very token stake in the airline, but they're not asking for a board seat. A stake is 1% or 2% or something like that. So it all depends. I think if the choice is between survival with the government having a board seat and dying, I think you choose the survival option.
Right. Let's go to Rishabh. Rishabh, shoot.
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ajay, for opportunity to talk to all the AvGeeks here. So my question will be that we will see the shrink in network expansion post-COVID. So do you guys see airline companies taking on their deliveries because few of them are on orders?
Well, it's a tough one because everybody's hurting. Even the aircraft makers obviously don't want to be stuck with finished aircraft or almost finished aircraft and nobody taking them. It's a very tough one. So that'll all depend on negotiations. But I expect that, I think it's not me, but the general feeling I get reading everybody's opinions, all those who follow the industry or write on the industry, is that in the next 1 year, I think it is safe to assume a 20% reduction in demand. 20% for India, if you apply the same to India, we have about 500 aircraft which are narrow bodies in India. 20% of that is 125 aircraft. Oh no, 100 aircraft. 100 aircraft would be surplus if you were to maintain the same load factor, or we would have all 500 flying with 20% less load factor. 2 ways to do it. So I think in terms of, I'm sure many airlines will be looking at deferring deliveries. For example, British Airways has announced that they're cutting their staff by 1/3, which means that clearly they're going to be 1/3 smaller for some time longer going forward. And so every airline will be sitting with every OEM and having discussions and seeing what can be done. Nobody has the answers. Nobody's been in this situation before.
Yep. So I think Sanjiv will put a hard stop on this now. There are obviously many questions that continue to pour in, but I guess we'll do a separate Q&A session and the day just with you, I guess, some point in time.
Sure.
Yeah, this could just go on in the night because we just have far too many people raising
That's all we
hands.
do. This lockdown, this is our entertainment and education for all of us. Yeah.
Well, guys, thank you very much for everyone who's still there. I see about 100 people between two screens still hanging on. Thank you very much. This kind of, we'll try and keep this a weekly feature. And Solo, Sanjiv, and Sudip, and Sandeep again, and Sudip, sorry, tongue twister. Thanks again for keeping up in your time zones. And chat soon, guys. Stay safe.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
so
Ajay.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.